Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner Podcast,
a podcast where we dig into the fascinating issues, conditions, and quandaries in the massage and manual therapy world today.
I'm Whitney Lowe.
And I'm Til Luchau.
Welcome to the Thinking Practitioner. Hi, this is Whitney Lowe, and Books of Discovery has been a part of massage therapy education for over 20 years. Thousands of schools around the world teach with their textbooks, e-textbooks, and digital resources. In these trying times, this beloved publisher is dedicated to helping educators with online-friendly digital resources that make instruction easier and more effective, in the classroom or virtually.
Books of Discovery likes to say, learning starts here. My name is Til Luchau, and they see that same spirit here on the Thinking Practitioner Podcast, where I'm with Whitney Lowe. They're proud to support our work, knowing we share the mission to bring the massage and bodywork community enlivening content that advances our profession. Check out their collection of e-textbooks and digital learning resources for pathology, kinesiology, anatomy, and physiology at booksofdiscovery.com, where Thinking Practitioners learners can save 15% by entering Thinking at checkout. Hey, Whitney, how you doing?
I'm doing well, sir, and how are you today?
I'm good enough, thanks.
All right.
What's new in your part of the universe?
Well, we're having a warm spell here over in Central Oregon, and we are those of us who work on the bird rehab front are a little concerned. This is an interesting little ecological tidbit here. You know, when you have warm winters and warm spells in the winter, bugs come out. They start to come out sooner than they should, and when the bugs come out early, they often hatch early, and then there's another cold spell again, and then when the birds actually hatch out, the bugs aren't in abundance. And I don't know if you've been hearing much about this, but there is something that a lot of people are referring to as the insect apocalypse.
Apocalypse?
Yeah, we are actually having a very serious crash in the insect population that's been happening over recent years, and that has huge ramifications for the whole ecological web. So we're noticing a good bit of that. And we've been watching this process.
Disruption of temperature cycles just changes hatch timing and the whole cascade of things that have evolved together.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things. It's climate change, it's pesticides, it's all kinds of things that are leading to this. Yeah. And so a lot of people don't realize that a serious crash in the insect population is going to have some very, very serious ramifications on all kinds of stuff. Food pollination, for example,
pollination of food crops, and then just the protein base for most of the life. I guess I remember reading how many pounds or tons of protein per acre there is. That's mostly this 90% plus insect life. Yeah, and that's most of that protein synthesis on Earth happens in the insect level and then works its way up the food chain. Yeah. So. Interesting things, and we're watching the sort of early stages of this. So this is the literal canary in the coal mine indicator for a lot of these things that I think we should be watching for coming down the pike. So, another way the base of our pyramid is wobbly.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I think it's true. Huh. So,
walking on shaky ground, walking on shifting sands, as Ida Rolf said. She said that was the biggest skill.
Yeah. I think we're all doing that. So,
well, besides that, what are we talking about today?
Well, let's see. I think today, you and I were having some conversations about things that really shaped us significantly and were influential things for us in our career. And we said, hey, we should talk some more about this in depth. Like, what are the big things that have been most influential for each of us, and sort of share those with people and see if this opens up some thought processes and dialogues about what shapes each of our different paths and what takes us down the directions that we go in. So,
I'm curious about yours, and it just curious because I know you and like you, and I'm curious about how you got to where you are. But I'm also interested just in how you got, as a person, as a colleague in this field, how you got shaped, what kinds of things sent you on your way. And then you asked me that question in advance, and it's interesting to see the list that came out of it from me too. So I think there might be a universal level here that I'm interested in as well, like what gets us where we are today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's kind of hard to draw that line and determine, where some of those things are, about how influential certain things were in our career. Like, how far do we go back? Like, okay, your childhood is probably pretty influential
Right.
somehow or other. And so, to where do we draw that line of significant things? But we probably
the
won't
era
go into.
we were born in.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Super, super detail about that. But
well, okay. So who's starting? Should I start?
yeah, start off.
All
Tell
right.
me, give me some
Okay.
in most influential things. I'm not necessarily in an order. I don't know if we'll take them in an order. We can maybe go importance, chronological, or however you want to handle it. But
And the question is, what events shaped
yeah, for what has
direction my
been most
career took?
influential
What has
for
been most
shaping your
influential?
path, your career, your direction, everything?
Okay. I brainstormed about 20 things. I'm not going to go through all of them. But when you asked that question just now, the one that came to me was showing up. And I'm just realizing now it must have been, it was 1983, so that's almost exactly 40 years ago, showing up at the gates of the Esalen Institute and saying, hey, I want to learn what you guys do.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard about you. I've read some stuff. I just want to do this. And I basically drove my old VW van down the hill there and said, can I come by?
Yeah.
And they said no. I said, you need to be like totally in a program and do all this stuff. You can't just drop by. But I was really interested in what I'd been reading.
Yeah.
It was early 80s, so I went and got in a program. And that was influential because it was a place so many things were happening still at that time.
Yeah.
I think the Esalen Institute, if you don't know about it, was influential on the culture in the 60s and the 70s and then into the first part of the 80s when I was there to some extent. And a lot of the Western traditions of body work, but certainly psychotherapy and somatic work and movement, spirituality, philosophy, things like that were being tossed around and explored and deepened there at the Institute.
Yeah. When I was studying psychology in grad school, I was really into Fritz Perls a lot. And that's where I first learned about Esalen and the things that were going on there.
That's right.
And, was he still around at that time? Or
he died in 1969 or 1970, I believe. So I got there in 83. So no, it was
quite a bit after that.
Yeah, but his shadow was pretty large. There were still many of his students there, and that was why I went there. I wanted to learn Gestalt, Fritz Perls' work. Yeah. So lots of Fritz stories, and we'd watch Fritz movies and Fritz study groups and things like that.
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty kind of gutsy move for a, let me think, 22-year-old?
22, yep. Good math, 20,
yeah. At that time. So how did that
happen?
Did you just kind of like I got to do this kind of thing, Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you and I started the podcast, we kind of interviewed each other about our backgrounds. And I think I told some of that story then, so I don't need to go back into it a whole lot. But it was, there's a couple things. I think I heard about the Esalen Institute from a massage book that I found in a bookstore in London. Uh-huh. It was George Downing's and Can't Rush did these nice line drawings. It was very 60s, 70s
I remember that book.
feel.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And I thought, this is cool. You could just, like a manual. You could go through and see, like, there's things to do. And then, so I started learning it. And then that was all about Esalen. And then one of my teachers in high school was on her way out of teaching high school, it turned out, and on her way into being a psychotherapist. And she would do little groups with us as part of her practice and her education and her internship hours, do like Gestalt groups with us after school. Mm-hmm. And that was really good for me at that time in my life. And so that at that point when I'm like 22 and had tried a bunch of stuff and done a few years of college and says, not now. I got back to it later, but at that point, no, I don't want to do this. What do I want to do? I think I want to learn Gestalt. I'm just going to go see what happens. And then, just to not tell you all about the 5 years I was there, but it basically got on staff eventually, trained in every kind of therapy I could, including a lot of hands-on therapies. And those are the ones that had the doors that opened the soonest. I went there to train in psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. But really, when I look back at, again, what happened there, it was those bodywork doors that opened wide and had some opportunities so that I jumped into and were great.
that's such a fascinating parallel with the both of us, because the both of us got into this field from psychology, going in that direction, and then eventually moving in towards what we were doing with more hands-on manual therapy approaches and everything. So I imagine that's certainly, I think that's true for you, and it is true for me, that has continued to be a significant influence, those perspectives and times. Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I do come out of that human potential tradition where a lot of the body work that was being taught had that dimension of personal development in it, as opposed to just purely, say, a technical field or a medical field or a rehab field or even a relaxation field. It was really about, working on ourselves, becoming more aware, working with our own boundaries, awareness, energy, body, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So how about you? What comes to mind for you when I ask about influential?
Yeah, so I kind of think about those things, and for me, it's also a turn of events very early in my career, and for me, I think a big one is my early association with Emory University in a couple of different ways. One was I had a great fortune of meeting and running into one of the physical therapists that was working with the Emory Clinic, and they were getting ready to build a totally state-of-the-art orthopedic clinic, and ironically, it was just right down the road from my house. And I lived when I was growing up, I lived very near to Emory University, and so she was asking me, she knew that I was involved with massage, and wanted to know if I wanted to come over and be a part of this clinic. And I thought, well, yeah, this is gonna be absolutely great. I was thinking about this earlier today when I was sort of thinking about these different things. There's another interesting kind of backstory to this, which is that they didn't know at the Emory Clinic that I had been banned from the Emory University campus for life.
By
the campus, by the campus police. When we were high school kids growing up, there was a lot of mischief that went on with us getting over and doing things on the Emory campus. It started when I was really young with skateboarding in the parking decks in there, and the police would always try to chase us and catch us in the parking decks, and they never could, because you could just skateboard down these ramps and then jump into the stairwells or whatever. So
faster than the police. That's pretty nefarious. I don't know if it is escalated from there, but you got to do something to get banned for life.
Yeah. So anyway, that was kind of funny. But the whole thing with Emory was very different. It was, working. This was an orthopedic clinic that had a wide group of individuals, physical therapists, athletic trainers, spine specialists, orthopedic surgeons, all working together in this team approach. And this is the first time I had really kind of looked at this whole idea of team care.
Yeah.
And at that time, also, I was spending a lot of time in the medical library, because this clinic was also a teaching clinic for the medical students there. And it was just such an absolutely rich environment with a group of people that were also really curious, because it was one of those kinds of things where we'd ask each other questions about, what are you doing here? What are you doing there? How are you doing this? And I would ask the orthopedist, can I follow you on rounds and ask you about patients? And I'd go into the treatment room and sit in on those things. And one day, I was following the orthopedist, the chief orthopedist around on his rounds. So we went into this room, and there was my old girlfriend was one of the patients in there. And she was just startled. I hadn't seen her in many, many years. And she looked up at me. She goes, "My God, are you a doctor?"
I thought you were banned for life, she said.
Right. No, just a massage therapist here following around. So it was kind of a funny situation. But that place really got me to see a lot of the big picture of the healthcare system, and looking at ways in which massage can integrate with the system, and also find ways that, we were exploring and doing all kinds of experimental processes with massage. Like, will it work on this? I have no idea. Let's try it. And will it work on that? And, sometimes it did, and sometimes it didn't. And it really helped me begin to have kind of a mental database of understanding what kinds of things might benefit and work better from that process, and what kind of things wouldn't. So
what a great opportunity, both the environment of the inquiry, and then being exposed to all the different professions and fields.
Yeah.
Working with people in an orthopedic way, and then that the chance to actually get the experience and see what worked and what didn't.
Yeah. It was really fascinating, and it really shaped a great deal of my learning and perspectives ever since that time. So that was and inspiring, totally inspiring. And it was for me absolutely like a dream job. And I ended up when I left there several years later, I was leaving because I was moving out of town, and it was hard to leave that job because I just thought, I will never get another opportunity like this again. And this has just been such a wonderful, really moving experience. So
it was hard to leave.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. So what's next on your list?
Other things that have influenced my careers. Yeah. I mean, I just have to pay homage to various mentors along the way who essentially, they all taught me something in terms of content or style. Mm-hmm. But really the biggest influence when I just made my list here was the fact that they believed in me. Mm-hmm. And either gave me opportunities or encouraged me to take opportunities. Like Rita Rowan, who was there at the Esalen Institute, who was teaching workshops in Mexico and wanted someone to teach some body work. So I was on the massage crew at Esalen and doing some teaching there, pretty junior position. But she really did, she kind of took me on my first international trip and my first non-Esalen teaching gig where I just had to teach basic massage in her workshops for her in Mexico. And that was a big moment for me. And her kind of belief in me, I was probably, 23, 24. No, probably 24 by then. So it was early on. But, there's a list of them. I got a list of a dozen names or so, people that just at different times says, yeah, I think you can do this. Here, let's throw you in. See how it goes. Uh-huh. Yeah. Great
opportunities. And you and I talked about this too, this term I've heard before about a talent vortex of just when you're involved and around a group of really talented people, how that tends to build that whole is the greater than the sum of the parts process of the thoughts and the things that come up and the ideas that are germinated from those kinds of experiences.
Well, there's certainly the environment there at Esalen, which is where Rita was, but also that act of mentoring, I think really, it launched me, but it really made me realize how powerful I could be in people's lives too. Yeah. It probably steered me toward the teaching I do to realize that, it's... people need encouragement, and sometimes that's all they need. They know so much.
Yeah.
Or they just need to believe in themselves, and I can help support that too.
Yeah. And I think, you have certainly continued to do that and become a mentor to a lot of other people down the road. So those are lessons that are getting passed down the road, I think, very effectively.
Wow. And then continue to have my own mentors and, more and more layers of both being supported and realizing what I don't know and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so your turn. How about you? Another one for you.
Well, another one for me. This would top the list in terms of degree of influence, I think, and this comes under the category of make lemonade when you're given lemons. Okay. Kind of thing. And I'll subtitle this "My Accidental Move to Oregon." So and I think I told this story. I can't remember if I told that in our beginning episode, but I had left Atlanta in the mid-90s, about 94, and was intending to move out to Colorado, to your town, in fact, and into Boulder, because it was such a bodywork mecca. And I thought, this is the holy grail. And my wife at that time and I were moving there to try to get in on that scene, and then couldn't find an affordable place to live in the Boulder area. And we were trying to sit around and figure out what to do. And she said, well, you've always said you want to go back to Oregon, because I'd been to Oregon 10 years earlier and just fallen in love with this place. She goes, let's just go there. And so we just got in the car and drove out there and ended up out on the coast of Oregon without intending to move there. And the big problem was that I had not investigated the licensure laws in Oregon prior to moving there.
And Oregon has pretty strict licensure laws.
At that time, and this was 1994, you had to wait until the next licensing exam came up before you could take a license to practice. And I just assumed I would, jump in and start practicing and make a living. And we started renting this house on a very remote part of the Oregon coast in a very remote area. And all of a sudden I couldn't work because the next licensure test was 6 months away. Yeah. And I had no money. I was broke, but we had paid off all of our debts and credit card bills and everything before we left. And to me, it was kind of like, okay, now what? And so began thinking, I've been wanting to create educational materials for massage therapists, and there's an opening here now to do that. I've been given 6 months of time where I can really just completely devote myself 100% to starting something like this. And I think there is a future in producing educational materials for massage therapists. And basically that was the spark and the fire that lit the whole process of what I started doing with the business and of producing educational materials, because I was very interested in education. And we had at that time, and this was again mid-90s, a real lack of any good educational materials for massage therapists in a lot of the massage schools. Yeah. And so I really thought there was a way to begin filling that void. And that forced me, again, because I was broke, and also because of technology at that time wasn't that advanced in producing some of the kinds of things that we were doing. I mean, I was not that far removed from the early days of Scotch taping pictures onto a piece of paper and photocopying them as for training manuals.
I've been there.
Yeah. And so
and then to do the background research, there wasn't like Google.
No, yeah,
go down to the library. You could, find as big a library as you can and just dig in.
Yeah, and I had moved out to the Oregon coast, and there were no libraries within anywhere near where I was out there, and so it forced me into learning a lot very fast about learning how to write, learning desktop publishing, learning about graphics and graphic formats and all those things that are involved with producing those kinds of materials, but then also organizing content and putting it together, and then also how does that blend in with what you're doing in the classroom and in the teaching environment as well. And had only just begun a little bit of a foray into teaching continuing education workshops that I had been doing with Benny Vaughn at that time. So that was starting to put some emphasis on, I need to figure out how to get some of this stuff going really quickly. So it was a very rapid fire learning process, but it turned out to be really very inspirational and helpful throughout the rest of my career, because having to learn all of that stuff by necessity to feed myself, and again, I lived off my credit cards for like 6 months and racked up a huge amount of debt in doing that. But I was committed to the vision, I was committed to the vision of making it happen.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I had taken even a business plan, I constructed a business plan and gone around to these banks and said, I believe there is a future as a massage education business. Really? I gave them all these details about the number of schools and the lack of resources and all this kind of stuff. And they said, wow, this is really interesting. Yeah. Good luck.
Good luck. They didn't want to have a part of it, huh?
No part of it.
We're hearing like a little origin story here. This is so interesting. It's like Jeff Bezos inventing Amazon in the front seat of his car driving across the country, or whatever story that is. That's like, this is how, Whitney, you saw an opportunity, you saw a place there wasn't a lot being done, and you had some need and you had some time, and you started to move into that space.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
So
I think, I hope someday we get Drew Beal to come tell his story. He's one of our sponsors and of Books of Discovery, of today's episodes, and he has some great stories too about the same quandary. There's just no educational materials. He was teaching. Yeah. And how his trail guide to the body came about, that kind of thing.
That's one of those things that was just such the right thing at the right time. And a few years ago, when they launched Trail Guide to Movement, they had a big celebration out there in Colorado. And Drew asked me to come out and talk about this. And I said, one of the things that I'll say about this book and also about the Trail Guide that I have heard probably at the very least a dozen educators say is, man, I wish I'd written that book. Because so many of them had a similar kind of idea, but he really, he had the right equations and the right resources to make it happen and to put it all together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did. Yeah, that's great.
So what's your next influential piece here?
Yeah, there's so many, aren't there? It's It's probably getting hired at the Rolf Institute. Tom Myers, on the list of mentors, Tom's there, but he hired me to assist him in a training at the Rolf Institute, and I was to be the bodywork teacher. He was the anatomy teacher, etc. And I trained as a Rolfer, and I was working as a Rolfer at that time. But that turned out to be a really rich chapter in my life of about 20 years working here at the Rolf Institute. And I ended up with that program as the coordinator of that program, which was the entry-level program into the Rolf Institute. And there was so much freedom and so much interest and such motivated students coming in. It was such a rich time in the field. This was early 90s. And so much was being written about, talked about, brought out. So I brought Tom back to be a teacher. I brought Peter Levine in to be the psychology teacher. Drew Juhan came in and taught about, connective tissue. Well, it's like, who's out there doing interesting work? John Cottingham, who did some of the initial work with Stephen Porges. Just like, who's the most interesting people in the field? How can we get them to come in here and lecture to us?
Yeah.
And so I was both coordinating that program and learning a lot. And then, like I said, it turned into a 2-decade career position on the faculty there at that entry-level program, and then also out into the rest of the program over time. Robert Schleip was a big influence on me there. And I still have, Jan Sultan, still have connections from that time. And then the arc of that was that after 20 years had passed, it was pretty clear to very amicably that it was just the things I want to do were outside of that realm. And so gradually started doing that, and that became what I'm doing now as well, the advanced trainings and the series of workshops there.
So can it refresh me a little bit, because I think this is interesting history, and for those that don't know, and I'd like your sort of take on this too. If I remember correctly and understand, there was sort of a split of kind of two different camps that was happening around that time.
That's
Is
right.
that correct?
Well, yeah, that was just within the first couple of years I was there. I trained with the figureheads, you could say, of one camp, him and Hutchins, and then there was, it was probably philosophical, but a lot of it was personality and organizational. There's lots of reasons why organizations split or people fight, but it was very painful for a lot of people involved, because my main teachers were on these two different camps, and there was a point at which the senior teacher, one of the senior teachers there, quit, as well as the director of the school, was fired, and they left in the middle of a course I was teaching with Tom, and we had to deal with the students, of course, questions, what does this mean? My God. And so, no, it was a very rough time, emotionally and on the, the vision of the work. But it's there's probably a lot of hurt feelings in any kind of process like that. But over time, it became a diversification or richness to the field too. That's allowed a lot of different things to connect. Tom eventually left the Rolf Institute too, and again, that he's gone a long ways with what he's doing. And he was pretty instrumental in creating an umbrella organization to reconnect all the splinters from Ida Rolf's tree, which had gone so many different directions.
Yeah. So that was kind of one of the earlier, more significant splits. And then there have been what seems like multiple different branching processes that have come out of that from the things that have happened throughout the process.
I think it'd be interesting to trace that out like a family tree, but it's most of the other branchings were individuals or maybe a couple people who would leave and start their own school because they just wanted to do it their way, or whatever. That was never their plan to be part of the Institute. So there's lots of different structural integration disciplines. Most of them were around a person or a personality or approach.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Joseph Hallers. I'm thinking of the Guild, which was, again, Eamon Hutchins and Peter Melchior's, the ones they started as they left. Tom Myers, anatomy trains, on down the list. And then a bunch of us came out of there. I came out of there. Eric Dalton, Art Riggs, Judith Aston, a bunch of us were Rolfers that eventually found ways to continue the work outside of the Institute that we'd started there.
Yeah. That, I've always been so fascinated by some of the comparisons of that lineage model of education versus some of the more, standard academic structures that we see in some of these other professions. And clearly in some early professions, there's often the case because you have a dynamic personality that's sort of at the start of something. And then, they have core students, some of which, again, that whole talent vortex, you bring a lot of people together and it boosts the overall creativity and inspiration from everybody involved. And then they may end up sort of going off in some slightly different directions as well. And so you see that whole growth and branching process evolve.
Growth and branching, evolution, standardization, usually crises of, my God, we're losing the vision, or it's getting stale, or whatever else, and renewal along the way. But there's, it was similar dynamics at Esalen, because I was there, like I said, maybe 10, 12 years after Fritz Perls died. I was there 3 or 4 years after Ida Rolf had died, and there were still many of her students there teaching the work. So those discussions were very much going on. It's like, do we do it exactly how the founder does? Do we evolve it? Is it still what it was if we change it a little bit?
Yeah.
And what are the new centers of gravity? Do we center around new people, or do we center around ideas or processes or institutions? All those things getting sorted out, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels with other things. I mean, there's parallels with the way you see, even things like, religions evolve after a dynamic individual or some kind of person leading the pack. And then, like, do we stick exactly to what they said, or do we bring in new influences and new ideas? And is that heretical to do that? It brings up a lot of questioning, and some people like the questioning and some people don't like the questioning of those things, for sure.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. It's the, how do bodies of knowledge persist, and how do they evolve and adapt over time?
Yeah.
Okay, so how about you?
Let's see. I have one more here that I think was, if I think about the big ones, and this is not so much an event, but I would say a trend. Of course, a lot of these things have not necessarily been events that we've talked about, but this is certainly very influential trend of things in me. And this happened after I had been teaching continuing education workshops for a number of years. And I would say it was probably coming to a head in the late 1990s. And this was a frustration with the format that I was having to teach a lot in. And this was the weekend workshop format. And a frustration that I was having in trying to teach more complex clinical reasoning processes in a 2-day weekend course.
In little bits. I am right with you, my friend.
Yeah. And recognizing, this is at the point too, I was starting to dive into a lot of the literature about learning theory and learning science, and starting to recognize that there were some things that I was seeing happening in the classroom. And you've seen this, I'm sure, a dozen times as an instructor, where you present something, you think you present it really well. You ask the students, does anybody have any questions? Nobody has any questions. And then you go to do some type of practical application with those concepts and ideas a couple minutes later, and people look at you like a deer in the headlights, like, I don't know how to do this because you didn't tell us what to do here. And I realized that a lot of this goes back to the way early education forms us to really be told information and just told everything by the instructor. And then we just, repeat that back on an exam at some point. And that is supposed to indicate mastery of concepts and ideas. And that whole idea really began to fall apart for me during that time. And I started thinking, there's got to be another way to do this more effectively. And it's what drove me to start paying a lot more attention to, I was looking into the educational strategies in other healthcare professions, in, the medical school and the nursing schools and physical therapy training programs. How were they doing some of these kinds of things? And for me, that was actually the beginning of questioning and looking into online education, because I started thinking and learning about, a lot of things around multimedia learning theory and the idea of spacing content over longer periods of time, so that people could incorporate that better and then come back and use retrieval practice to pull that up again and do something else with it. And I recognized that a lot of this stuff couldn't happen in a 2-day intensive course like this. It just, logistically, it wasn't going to work. And that's what really drove me to start exploring the frontiers of really high quality online learning experiences. And again, this is the early 1990s and early 2000s, and the technology for doing this kind of stuff was really rudimentary at that time. And my first couple of forays into that were very basic kinds of things too. What I saw wanting to do just wasn't really practical with some of the technological limitations. But
even an image had to be super compressed. Forget video or audio.
Yeah. There was no video or audio things that were going to happen because it was back to the dial-up connections and 28K modems and all that kind of thing that people were on at that time. So there was a vision of something that could possibly happen in the future, but I was also forced to learn a whole lot more about software and some of the tools that were being used to build some of this stuff. And
wait a minute. Yeah. You said forced.
Yeah, by necessity.
Don't you like it like a little bit?
I love it, but it's like what I was saying. The forced thing. Here's where I'm getting it from is that I began with some ideas about how I was going to do this. I said I need to go to some people who've done this really well, and I saw that there was some really good advancements that were going on over at the University of British Columbia. And I started talking to some of the people in the instructional design department here and about this and, how we would do some of these kinds of things and how we would deploy it. And I was going to work with them on this program I was building. And we started going through some of the process, and I kind of got to a point of saying we were having some difficulty of translating some of the content into ways that I wanted them to build things. And I just was sort of saying, wait a minute, I can really do this better
yourself
because I know the content and I know what needs to happen.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, I'm going to have to learn a whole lot more about software and the learning processes and things like that. So that's where the forced learning came into it. But you're absolutely right. I'm a geek. There's no doubt about that. And I loved learning that stuff because I thought it was fascinating. So
no, you're right. It is just for myself too. It is a love of necessity or something like that.
Yeah.
A necessary love, because from switching from slide carousels to PowerPoint to online learning, each of that was a technical hurdle in a way, but it was exciting.
Yeah.
And continues to be. And it's not separate from the craft of teaching and educating. I would say, of course, the technical skills, but also learning how to use that technology. And so at some point, it's easy for me just to go edit my own video than look over someone's shoulder and say, yeah, right there, that's it. That's the moment.
Yeah, right, exactly. And, some of the software tools that were able to build more complex, branching scenario learning activities would be effective for doing some of the things that I was trying to get people to do with clinical reasoning. And I couldn't do that by just having them, read a PDF document or watch a video or things like that. There had to be trial and error. There had to be a way for people to have mistakes and learn different pathways of thinking and all that kind of stuff to mimic what really happens in the clinical reasoning process.
To move through a process and not just down a single stream.
Yeah. So, So to me, those were, it has continued to be a fascinating journey, but I think something that has really pushed the envelope of making me look at what is possible and what can we do to really model high quality learning processes in that environment. Because that's, to me, that's a far better way to teach the complexities of clinical reasoning than it is to try to do this in our standard classroom environments, which is essentially one pace fits all, and everybody has to follow the pace of whatever the teacher is delivering, and they can't take their time to make individual pathways, choices, and mistakes and back and learn from those and do things. It's logistically not feasible, especially in the weekend workshop format. So,
that's great. That's true. And so you've found ways to continue that evolution and to replicate that process, refine that process in your online programs.
Yeah. So, and it continues to be an exploration process of I look at what I'm still very much, reading, learning, and listening to a lot of what's happening in the new instructional design forums and, books that are out and things like that. And, looking towards the future, and people are now talking about like, well, when is artificial intelligence going to start making more of a dent in this, and how can we do things with virtual reality? And like, wow, it's really getting far down the road of some of these kinds of things. But the trick there is to not get sucked into the bells and whistles of technology and lose the key concepts of making good instructional design, because that's where the rubber really hits the road. Is, is this a good and worthy instructional design to get across what you're trying to do, or is it just the wow factor?
Right. The fundamentals of the design,
the
actual progression of the content, the way it's presented, and the ideas and concepts that build. All those is what makes the difference. And then the channels that we learn in. I mean, Zoom fatigue is probably the biggest enemy of all this stuff. Just too much time in one mode of doing it. It ends up burning people out. And so it was COVID was such a watershed moment where so many people says, okay, I'll give it a try. And a good number of the online learning thing, a good number of them go, wow, this is actually better than I thought. This could be okay. And then a good number go, no, this sucks. I can't even log in. Forget it. I'm going to stay with what I get. I know.
And, so much what happened during the COVID process, it was, to me, I think it will turn out in the long run, as we look back on it in hindsight, to be a good accelerator of some needed changes in our educational strategies and methods to see because a lot of us were banging our fists on the door saying look at the potential and the possibilities with online education. The doors were just continually being shut. And then all of a sudden everybody had to do it, and it turned into emergency remote teaching. And it was kind of disastrous in a lot of instances because people hadn't spent any time learning how to do it well.
Do I feel for kids and college students, and just having to put in those years on Zoom without that, again, like you said, keeping the door shut for so long, and then all of a sudden, now we're going to just instantly do it, the same thing on Zoom. Oh boy.
And so it's, the technology, the infrastructure, the money for schools to take the time to really learn how to do this well, it just wasn't there, and we didn't have time to prepare for things. But my hope is that from this process, we will actually learn that, we actually explored and learned that there really are some good things. And that's not necessarily really all about Zoom. A lot of it isn't.
It's another tool, another medium, another outlet, another channel that we can use to be together, exchange information, and learn. But it's just a channel. That's all it is.
So hopefully, I think some of those changes will be accelerated to some degree, and that will encourage us to move towards taking the good and dropping off some of the other things that weren't so good, that didn't work so well in that environment.
I think so. No, I think so. In fact, in my own thinking about it, the line is blurred between offline and online, so that it's integrated to a level that we don't even realize anymore. That 10 years ago, we would have gone, whoa, that's really pretty intensively online. And now we're like, no, this is just me talking to my buddy on Zoom or whatever. No, it just becomes more normalized over time, too. It gets integrated so that we don't even think about that distinction so much. Very natural. And the things that we've become accustomed to doing and working with technology, the more we become familiar with it, the more it seems like second nature kinds of things. Because certainly, I mean, even if we go back a couple of decades, what we were talking about, where we were getting started in the 80s or 90s, if we had a vision or a view into what we would be doing and how we would be transmitting content and information and talking to people instantly all over the world, at the same time. Back then, we probably would have been like, oh, okay, you're talking about the Jetsons. This is not really real. It was pretty heady. It's kind of normalized now, but it was like, whoa, people from like Brazil tuning in. That's so cool. Yeah, exactly.
I remember the first time that I, back when I was in psychology graduate school, I was studying the works of this guy who was I believe he was at UC Berkeley, and you may know of his name. His name was Charles Tart, and he was doing a lot of work in transpersonal psychology and some of those fields, and I was fascinated by his work. And this is probably early 90s when I first got on the internet, and there was access, it was all black screens and white type and all this kind of stuff to log into a server somewhere. But I learned that people had an email address that you could write to them, and they could write back to you over the computer. And I was like, and I suddenly came upon Charles Tart's email address somewhere, somehow, and I can't remember how it was, but I was just like realizing, my God, I could ask this guy a question, and he was on a couple of different forums or something like that and responding to people. And it's just like, this is amazing, that these people are accessible. and
they're
able
really
to be
living and alive and interactive, and I can
Yeah.
just like type in their email address, and they'll like even maybe answer me sometimes, or I can find forums where they're living and
Yeah.
breathing and working.
Yeah, they're engaging in discussions, and I'll listen in and learn things and everything. So yeah, it's been a wild ride for sure.
Well, no, Charles Tartt's on my list of avenues to pursue because his work, a lot of his work was around, if I remember right, altered states of consciousness or the nature of consciousness, say. And I have this theory, Whitney, that a big part of what we do is we're just, alterers of states of consciousness in our clients and maybe in ourselves.
Yeah.
But we actually did that experience of getting really good body work could be defined as a state of consciousness shift as much as a connective tissue or functional shift or anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, that's a fascinating list that we've come up with, and some very interesting events, influences, things like that. Anything else you want to finish with?
There's so, like I said, there's so many more, but maybe the one do I do the 2008 recession, or do I do the trip to Mexico with Burroughs?
Yeah.
Tough choice. The 2008 recession was good for me in terms of it ended my other work, which was as a corporate management consultant. I was working with teams in a lot of tech companies about collaboration and communication, which I really enjoyed, but money for consultants completely dried up.
I didn't know that you were doing all that stuff back then.
Yeah.
Huh, cool.
It was really cool.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, I got a kid. At that time, my kid was like, what was he, 8 or 9. I got a mortgage. I got to do something. And this bodywork thing's pretty cool. It's still going. It was like a sideline, essentially. So that's about the point I jumped in.
Yeah.
And one of the early things we did was we went to Mexico and did a retreat. We found a little hotel in Jalapa that would let us use their roof for a workshop space. And they borrowed massage tables from all of the gringo massage therapists in towns and made some and rented some and trucked them all up in a little burro wagon train up to the top of this hill where the hotel was. So there's like burros loaded with massage tables going up to this hotel, and then carted them. We all of us carted them up on the roof and set up this thing with tarps, and it was looking out over the ocean, and there were whales going. And that was our first retreat.
Huh. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, the myofascial retreat, we called it.
Uh-huh. And what year was this?
This would have been 90, 2000. I have to think. It was a while ago. It was at least 10, 15 years ago. My goodness, that's embarrassing. I can't even remember the year. It was a while ago. Yeah. But that started a tradition of these kind of transformative retreats, too, that have been a big part of my life since then. Yeah. Going to amazing places.
Yeah. Fascinating when we look back at the seeds of where those things come from, and what are the sort of processes that got them started there. So
how about you? Did you get your highlights, or do you have a...
Yeah, I think I really got my highlights of those things that have been really most influential for me. I would, be remiss if I didn't also at least mention, too, when you were talking about mentoring processes, my relationship with Benny Vaughn has been incredibly influential and important to me, as, he was the first person that I ever encountered in the education world that started talking about assessment and evaluation as an important factor. And that, of course, started me on a big, long process of exploring that in much greater detail. And he has continued to be such a great teacher and influence for me in terms of watching what he's done and how he's brought massage so very far with the work he's accomplished. So that has certainly been a huge influence on me as well.
Yeah quite a man.
Yeah. So good. Well, we'll have to, these stories have reminded me of some things that I think maybe we should do an episode on the strangest, most bizarre things that we've encountered in our teaching world, and how they've also been a part of this too, because those were some interesting stories there as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, more to come, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you, Whitney. We'll thank our sponsors for today. We are supported, the Thinking Practitioner Podcast is supported by ABMP, Associated Bodywork and Massage Professionals. ABMP membership gives professional practitioners like you a package including individual liability insurance, free continuing education and quick reference apps, legislative advocacy, and much more.
And ABMP's CE courses, podcast, and Massage and Bodywork magazine always feature expert voices and new perspectives in the profession, including both you and I. So Thinking Practitioner listeners can save on joining ABMP at abmp.com/thinking. So we would like to say a thank you to all of our sponsors and also to all of our listeners. We thank you for hanging out with us every couple of weeks and hope you learn some stuff there as well. You can stop by our sites for show notes, transcripts, and extras. You can find that off of my site at academyofclinicalmassage.com. And Til, where can they find that with you?
advanced-trainings.com. If you have questions or things you'd like to hear us talk about, email us at info@thethinkingpractitioner.com or just look for us on social media under our names. I am Til Luchau, and who are you, Whitney?
Today I will be Whitney Lowe, and you can find me under social media there as well. So please do make sure, if you have a chance, hop over to Apple Podcasts and give us a rating over there. It does help other people find the show. And you can hear us, of course, on many other podcast platforms, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or wherever else you happen to listen. And please do share the word and do tell a friend. And of course, as always, if you're unable to find us in any of those locations, you can calibrate your therapeutic ultrasound device to 14 billion kilohertz, and you can hear us over there.
Zowie.
Right.
Cool.
That will, I think, wrap it up for us here. And we will see you on the next go round. And thank you. Great to talk to you here on this topic.
Thank you, Whitney. See you later.
All right. Sounds good.